Choice Hotels get you more of what you value. Comfort Inn, it's calling your name. Save on the stay. Oh, and free waffles are yours to claim. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
Hey there, Duke fans. Welcome to episode number 827 of the Duke Basketball Roundup. I know it's been a minute, but we've had some news and we're trying to compile some news so that we can discuss everything with you at once. I am Donald Wine. I'm your host for this episode. I am not in my home. Normally, I'm in Washington, D.C., but if you've been living under a rock, you know that I am a soccer fan. I am out here in L.A. for the start of the 2026 World Cup. Of course, the United States are playing here on Friday. I got out here late last night. When I say late, I mean 1 a.m. So I'm still feeling the effects of the East Coast, but I am ready for the tournament. I'm also ready to discuss basketball with my friend Scott Rich, who is here. Jason Evans is still on vacation. He'll be back at some point next week, or he might stay. He sent some pyramid pictures. But Scott, how you doing, man? Good to see you.
Enjoying life in, the much more boring state of compared to what you and Jason are doing, but such is life.
You know what? There's going to be a time where you're going to do something, and me and Jason are going to be like, man,
there we go.
Why did you invite us? He didn't invite us to. I did invite y'all to the World Cup. I just didn't have any tickets for you. But he didn't invite us to Egypt. So
I don't have a spare, $10,000 lying around. I wish I did.
Neither do I. My tickets were way less than that, but I don't have those either. They're pretty dire straits here as far as ticket supply and demand. Very, very askew. But I digress. Let's talk about the basketball. And last time we talked, Scott, we talked and then we got off and we finished recording. We put the episode out, and then like maybe 24 hours later, it was announced, or at least reported by Matt Norlander. I don't think it's been officially announced yet that the Duke-Michigan game will no longer take place at Madison Square Garden. We talked about the snafu and the griping dispute between Amazon Prime and Fox wanted to claim that game and say that this game should be on Fox or on one of their networks that they own with the Big Ten. And Amazon Prime said, well, you know what? If we have a dispute about it being at the Garden, we can take this elsewhere. We are a national company. So they have done that. And they've taken it to Miami, but not to the Kaseya Center, which is the home of the Miami Heat, which you would think would be a comparable alternative. They are taking this to Lone Depot Park, which is the home of the Miami Marlins. So we will move from MSG to the Fish Tank. The Fish Tank has a lot more seats. You can fit 40,000 in there for a basketball game. Sightlines going to be a lot different than you're usually used to, either at a Final Four or at a game in Madison Square Garden. But Scott, you are the one. Me and you are the two most directly affected by this because we were split in the middle. Basically, you're a little closer than I am to New York City, but it would have been very easy for us to meet in New York City for this game. Now I have to, twist my arm, travel to my second home of Miami to watch this game. But your thoughts, first off, on this switcheroo?
Yeah, no, that the change of venue works out a little better for you than it does for me. The Rich clan was already planning Christmas vacation around going to the game, doing Duke Michigan round 2. I'm not quite sure if we're gonna follow you down to Miami for that. I will say that, it does sort of suck to lose a Madison Square Garden game. Duke, Georgia in Madison Square Garden doesn't quite have the allure as Duke, Michigan in Madison Square Garden. But, you sort of think, hey, when that news came out that we were playing in the Jimmy V, that maybe that was sort of the replacement game. And that, of course, came to pass. I will say I low-key like the idea of playing a game in a non-arena stadium, if for no other reason than that's where the Final Four is played. And for years and years and years now, the storyline has always been, I'm pretty sure the stats don't actually bear this out, but the storyline has always been, hey, when you get to the Final Four and you're playing in a football stadium, the sight lines are different and people shoot worse. And all of these storylines, again, I'm pretty sure people have done the statistical analysis and shown that that's not the case. But
well, Scott, to your point, right? Michigan practiced at the big house to prepare for
Yeah.
the Final Four in Indianapolis. So it worked for them. They ended up winning it all. And I think that's sort of, it might be something that when you look at the stats, you're like, this doesn't compute. But at least there's some sort of mantra there or some sort of stigma where people feel like they have to work around it.
Exactly. And so I like the idea, hey, you're not going to fill a football stadium for, a non-Final Four game. But Duke, Michigan is probably going to do a pretty darn good chunk of that baseball stadium, especially when you consider the huge alumni bases that, particularly of older alumni, I would imagine, of both these institutions that are concentrated in Florida. So I like the idea of doing something different. We know that John Shire does not shy away from doing new and different things, and this certainly qualifies as new and different. And again, if Duke gets where we want to be and we're in Detroit next April, we'll have one extra bit of prep under our belts where we've played a game of basketball in a non-traditional venue. And we're going to be doing it against, one of the other top 5, 10 teams in the country.
Yeah, I was going to say, having that kind of matchup against a team that you would see on that court at Ford Field is something that I'm sure they thought about. And I also think the spectacle of it, right? Like we don't get a lot of these spectacles. I don't know if you remember this. This was a couple years ago. There was that rumor that we were going to play St. John's at Arthur Ashe Stadium
Yes.
at the U.S. Open. And that didn't come to pass, but it was something that people were really excited about because, hey, it's a 23,000 seat stadium that has a roof. It looks similar to a basketball court, like as far as like the sight lines, but it's still a different venue that you wouldn't normally expect to have a basketball game. And so Duke is usually not a part of these type of spectacles, but it seems like John Shire is at least considering some of these things. And in this case has said, yeah, let's take it to a baseball stadium. Let's see what we can do with it. Can we fill this place to the brim? That would be great. If, like you said, if we get 25, 30,000 people in a 40,000 seat baseball stadium, you're still looking at a pretty solid chunk of revenue and all that stuff. And of course, the Amazon Prime can kind of use this to continue to market the game. Not that this game needs any more marketing, but they can continue to hype it up even that much and have the baseball angle in it. All the guys who from Michigan who and even Duke who are baseball players can show up and have this little cross section of things that they have. And of course, they have a lot of different sports on there. So it's easy for Amazon Prime to kind of marry all these two into one big event.
Yeah, something tells me that Derek Jeter will be incorporated into the broadcast in some fashion for that reason. But the last thing I will say on this is that I love that both John Shire and Michigan said, no, 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 we want this game to happen. We want Duke Michigan round 2 for a second year in a row. We're going to find the solution to this rather than letting, Fox digging in his heels torpedo the game. We were thinking, hey, what SEC team is going to take Michigan's place, et cetera, et cetera. No, no, no. They want Duke Michigan to continue that momentum of rebuilding that rivalry that was such a big thing in the 90s. They want to continue that. I think that's great for both schools. I think that's great for the sport. I think that this is going to be a really cool showcase game come holiday season.
And I would be remiss if I didn't note that the timing of this came just as rumors were starting to poke out about both Dusty May and John Shire being contacted for interviews by the Dallas Mavericks, and that, depending on what Twitter troll you were looking at or listening to, the interest between the Mavericks and insert coach was high. This announcement.
Well, yeah, because that's the dumbest, laziest reporting ever. Because of course they're going to be interested in the two best, biggest name coaches in college basketball. That's not reporting. That's stating the obvious, and that's what you get clicks.
And also, I think the reporting of this game being moved into from what would be a high profile matchup to a high profile matchup plus spectacle at a baseball stadium is kind of both schools telling everybody out there, shut up. These coaches are coaching in this game because they would not have this sort of event planned only for one of them to leave after that. I think that was their subtle way of saying, everybody shut up. There's no rumors are rumors, but these coaches are going to be coaching in this game on December 21st. And you guys will like it. You guys will enjoy it, and you guys should watch. So with that, we're going to end that discussion, and we're going to move on to the main discussion that we were also here for, which is the ACC-SEC Challenge. Of course, Duke is back in this, and as we have speculated all along, Duke will travel to Gainesville, to the Stephen C. O'Connell Center, to face Florida on Tuesday, December 1st. We're going to talk about this game, Scott, then we'll take a quick break and talk about the rest of the matchups. But again, it feels like we've been talking about this potential matchup for a long time, but now that it's official, your thoughts?
I mean, it could be number one versus number two in the country, and that's why ESPN couldn't resist putting this on the SEC ACC itinerary. I think it will be a really interesting matchup of ceiling versus floor. And what I mean by that is Florida is the consensus number one team in the country in all these way too early rankings because we know what their floor is, and their floor is pretty damn high because they're returning 4 out of 5 starters from a team that was a number one seed, that was got upset obviously early in the tournament, but ran roughshod through the SEC. We know what their floor is, and their floor is really darn good. The question with them is their ceiling is not something that they achieved, right? They faltered in the NCAA tournament. They were very, iffy in the non-conference portion of their schedule last year. That's why they were the 4th out of the number one seeds, the sort of last one to squeeze in there. So the question is, which version of Florida is going to show up over the course of the long season? Is it going to be a true national championship contender, or is it going to be essentially the same team that we saw last year? Unless we forget, Florida doesn't necessarily have a great replacement for Xavier Lee. I say that assuming that Denzel Aberdeen doesn't get a waiver for his 5th year because there's no universe in which he should. But then again, there's no universe in which Brendan Sorsby should be playing college football after gambling. So
we can't talk about that today.
who the heck knows at this point? So, but even if you assume that he plays, you slot him in for Xavier Lee, and okay, you got more or less the same Florida team. This Duke team is not the same Duke team. We know that for reasons good and bad. The bad is there's no Cam Boozer, there's no Isaiah Evans. The good is there's John Blackwell. The good is there's Cam Williams and Boomje, and a lot of 3rd-year Pat Gongba, 2nd-year Caden Boozer. These high upside guys that we're really excited about for Duke. I think it's fair to say that Duke's floor may be lower than Florida's, but Duke's ceiling might be higher than Florida's when you think of the improvement that we expect our guys to make from freshman to sophomore year or from sophomore to junior year. And so it'll be really interesting to see early in the season, early in December, where is Duke on that trajectory? And is Duke already at a point where they're competing with a team that's, Final Four good? Or are we still on that upward trajectory, figuring out who's starting at the 4, figuring out who the lead guard in the backcourt is out of our 4 really strong options? It's going to be a great early season assessment of where are we on that ascent to raising banner number 6.
And to add to that, right? I mean, I think this is the matchup that they should have had. This is the matchup that we expected. And this is the matchup that we got. And I'm not surprised that we got it. And as you mentioned, 1 versus 2 potentially, at least to start the season. And maybe at that point, we talk about our non-conference schedule, right? Army and Coastal Carolina right now are the 2 games that we're like, okay, we can maybe breathe in those games, maybe, because we have Illinois at home, Georgia, obviously, UConn, Michigan, Gonzaga, and that's not counting the potential preseason games at Kansas and against Tennessee. So we smoke, as I've mentioned, has never been ducked by John Shire, and this is no exception. But I also think that I honestly like when we go on the road for the ACC-SEC Challenge because it's a new building. Like it's not a building that Duke has played in a long time, right? Like we don't get to go travel to the SEC a lot, and so far in this ACC-SEC Challenge, the fact that we've gone to the Bud Walton Center, which is one of the loudest places in college basketball, and now going to the O'Connell Center, where again you're playing a really tough Florida team. I think that's what John Shire wants. And it's like almost like a baked in way for him to say, hey, give me your best shot, right? Like I want to go to these places. These are new environments, and this is the kind of stuff that he wants to see as he develops this team into the team that he can take into March and April.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think we've seen develop under John Shire during his first 4 years as a coach going into his fifth is that his teams have gotten better playing on the road each year that he's played. And I think part of that is him going out and really seeking out a really challenging non-conference road game these last 2 years. And yes, 3 years ago we lost to Arkansas, but they were a so-so team. That was a bit of an outlier performance, I would say. But having that really challenging road game against a top five, top 10-ish team gets this team ready for the ACC road game. Where, hey, going on the road to face a Georgia Tech, we're a lot less likely to show up sleepy when we've already seen, okay, this is what it takes to win on the road. We've done that in the hardest of venues, and hopefully we win this game. If not, hopefully we put up a really darn good performance. And I think that really gives these guys experience for the ACC road games. And that's something that makes a difference between winning the conference versus not, versus being a 1 seed versus a 2 or 3 seed, is how many of those, I got knocked off by a team that shouldn't have beat me, but it was on the road, games do you suffer? Playing these type of challenging non-conference road games early in the season are the first best way to get your team ready for those later in the year.
And the non-conference schedule is not yet done. There's still few games here to fill out. Over the past few years, we've had the Brotherhood run either in the regular season last year or in the preseason, which we've had the past couple of years. If we really are going to Kansas and hosting Tennessee in the preseason, then that means that the Brotherhood run at some point will be set up in the early part of the regular season. Obviously, you don't try to repeat teams in that, at least while you can. So
Northwestern,
yeah. So again, there's a way to make this where it's still a difficult game, and you're bringing home someone to get their flowers. Chris, I looked at Northwestern and say, hey, you got a Big Ten opponent, a very strong, decent opponent, and a guy who has not been back in a long while since he was coaching under Coach K. So for him to kind of come back and get that reception would be an interesting one, right? You even have a Harvard, right, with a Tommy Amaker. We've had UCF already, but like we've seen some of these where we kind of bring them in, and also if it's one of these your lower tier team, does Evan Brad's count, right? So, would he be something you bring in as part of a double, kind of a multi-team event where you kind of have the three teams facing each other over the course of a couple days?
I will say I'm not sure what John Shire is thinking of for these last few games, but my dream scenario is to play Belmont. My dream scenario is there's all this chatter last year driven by the Miami, Ohio of it all, of no one's willing to play the mid majors because they don't want to mess with their net. They don't want to suffer that loss. John Shire doesn't duck any smoke. John Shire, show everyone else how it's done. Say, I'm going to schedule one of the top mid-major programs. I'm going to do it against one of my buddies, a guy who was on my bench last year. Heck, let's open the season against Belmont. We need that good game on to bring everybody in that first Monday of the year. It's probably not going to be against a Texas caliber team like we did last year with the gauntlet of a schedule we already have. Open the season against Belmont. Open the season by bringing in one of the best mid-majors in the country to the best arena in the country. ESPN would be real damn happy if that's one of their opening night games. I think that would be a home run on a whole lot of counts.
I like that matchup. I don't know that I necessarily agree that it should be the first game. I wouldn't be surprised if it's the first game. But again, given how John Shire's kind of made his schedule over the past couple of years, you're looking at a team that's maybe last year it was Texas, right? So like a team that you expect to be decent, make the tournament, a big name, something that you can package in the case of Texas last year, maybe put it in Charlotte or put it in somewhere neutral. But I agree with you. I think bringing in a Belmont to show the rest of the country, like, we're not afraid. Like, you guys keep saying you want to play these teams. What about us, right? Like, come face Duke and see where the chips fall. I wonder if to kind of make it a kind of a helper out for Evan. He goes, "Hey, let's schedule this for a little bit later in November so that you can get your team together, as opposed to throwing them to the wolves in the very first game." But
That's a tough first contest as a head coach. I agree.
yeah,
That might
yeah,
be too much too soon.
right, right. So, again, this Florida game, I think, is part of all of this, right? This whole non-conference slate that once again John Shire is building, and these tests that these guys are going to endure once the season starts. Let's take a quick break. We're going to talk about some of the other ACC-SEC challenges on the other side. Plus, the women have the ACC-SEC challenge, and we talk about who they draw. Very familiar opponent on that one. More after this. All right, we are back. We shift our attention from just Duke versus Florida in this ACC-SEC challenge and expand it to the rest of the ACC-SEC challenge. And we're going to go through these matchups that we have, and then Scott and I are going to talk about the games that intrigue us the most. Let's start on Tuesday, December 1st. That's the big lineup for the men's side of basketball. You have Auburn traveling to Little John to take on Clemson. Of course, Duke at Florida. Texas will be visiting Louisville. Florida State will head to Knoxville to face Tennessee. Wake Forest will travel to Baton Rouge to take on LSU. Pitt will travel to face Missouri. NC State will host South Carolina. North Carolina, UNC will host Arkansas. That seems to be a big matchup of the day as well. And then you have Oklahoma hosting Syracuse, Virginia Tech hosting Ole Miss, and Georgia hosting Boston College. Now, just taking that first day, first of all, monster slate, but what games stand out to you, Scott?
I mean, what stands out to me is I think the three best games are all on Tuesday, which is a interesting decision by ESPN when you think about that. But I think the three best games are Duke, Florida, Texas, Louisville, and Arkansas, North Carolina. Texas, Louisville is the type of game that's a Sweet 16, Elite Eight, maybe Final Four-ish caliber game. That's arguably the number one and the number two transfer portal classes in the country, which I think is a really interesting matchup because we've seen time and time again that transfer-led teams don't always mesh. For every team like Michigan that, Ren did really well. Michigan's the first one to go all the way to the national title game. Obviously, there are transfer-led teams that everyone thought was going to be great preseason that crash and burn. So I think that's going to be a really interesting matchup of which of these coaches has done a better job at putting the puzzle pieces together out of the transfer portal. And then obviously, we always like to see what's going on 8 miles down the road. I think that game versus Arkansas will be a really interesting early season test for UNC. Similarly, to see how their transfer-led team is sort of comprised going against a couple of, the best freshmen in the country that John Calipari always has. It'll also be interesting to see how they do against a pretty decent returning Arkansas front line. Billy Richmond was a guy who flirted with the draft and then came back. We all sort of expect that the weakness on UNC's team is going to be that front line, is going to be that rebounding in that center position. Arkansas is a team that could pose some interesting physicality problems for them down low. I think that could be a really interesting matchup.
Yeah, I'll talk about when we get to the rest of the matchups, two that I like on the Wednesday lineup. But Arkansas UNC is definitely, in my mind, next to Duke Florida as the top billing of the evening. One of those is probably going to be at 7. One of those is probably going to be at 9:30, right? It's just a matter of which one ESPN wants to put there. You mentioned those two games, so I won't mention Texas Louisville, which I think is also an intriguing matchup. But I'm going to mention two that I'm like, ESPN, you had a chance here and you missed it. Wake Forest at LSU, and then South Carolina at NC State.
They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it.
It's ESPN. They could do what they want. They had an opportunity here to, light the tires. And again, that would have been one of those matchups that they could have just thrown on at 7 o'clock, and everyone would have at least tuned in for a little bit to be like, I wonder what would happen if LSU traveled to NC State. Now, what I don't know is if, because we're at the end of this first 4-year rotation here, and you have to be 2 at home, 2 away in those 4 years. I don't know if it's lined up where LSU and NC State had to be home teams, and that's what precluded this. But if I'm ESPN, that would have been again. You think about the matches that we discussed, right? The Arkansas, UNC, Texas, Louisville, Duke, Florida. Those are easy ones for people to get excited about. But the issue for the ACC specifically is that they want to have everybody be in one of these blind where everyone's like, "Ooh, that's okay. That's a good matchup." And you want everyone to be intrigued about all of these teams. And to do that, the ACC should be saying, hey, this is the biggest story, one of the biggest storylines of college basketball in the offseason is Will Wade ditching NC State for LSU, not having basically a roster until late May, and then signing half of Europe to fill in that roster. And then also that like having him return to Raleigh would have just been the just icing on the cake in that regard. So again, it's not every year that we have these opportunities. So when you do have something that presents it, ESPN, take advantage of it, baby. Like
Something tells me that there might have been some physical safety concerns. Hey, what's the police presence going to need to be if Will Wade returns to NC State? Maybe they didn't want to incur those costs.
There was definitely going to be heightened security the first time that Will Wade travels to Raleigh, if that ever happens. And it could be where, there's some matchups they just won't ever do. That might be something
we never
to do.
played Maryland the entire duration of the Big Ten ACC challenge.
Correct.
Right? There's some influence going on there. That was a really, that was a low-hanging fruit that ESPN never picked for whatever reason. So there's stuff going on underneath the table, obviously.
Right. It also didn't help that Maryland kind of sunk in quality after they went to the Big Ten. So it was easier for ESPN to say, this is not an intriguing matchup, ladies and gentlemen. I know you guys have history, but they have history against the entire ACC, right? So let them play Miami or something. Speaking of, let's get to the Wednesday lineup, and it's a very short one. Georgia Tech will travel to Starkville to take on Mississippi State. You have Vanderbilt at Notre Dame, Alabama at Miami, Stanford at Texas A&M, and Kentucky at Virginia. Now, you mentioned that Texas Louisville was one of your top matchups. I think that Alabama at Miami and Kentucky at Virginia are two of the better ones on this in this entire challenge. So I like that they kind of have split it up and kind of made it even. You have two on the Tuesday, two really big matchups on the Wednesday. But I'm really excited, especially as obviously a Miami grad, for that Alabama game because I hate Nate Oates. I want him to lose. But I also think that Miami is going to be a team that can challenge in Alabama, and that can be a pretty even matchup. In Kentucky at Virginia, I mean, Kentucky, they saved themselves, I guess, by getting Milan Momcilovic in the transfer portal, but they've had a rough going in this offseason. They need to have a particularly intriguing matchup. Virginia strikes that as one of the teams that we think is going to be one of the best in the ACC.
We're going to transition to the women's matchups next, but I do think it's interesting that I think the lower tier good games are on Wednesday, in part because there are a lot of really intriguing women's games that in the women's SEC ACC challenge that start on Wednesday. I think that's a very interesting move by ESPN to shine that light on both equally. I will say that Miami is a team that is probably the stealth contender for in ACC championship, a stealth Sweet 16 caliber team. This is their opportunity to announce that to the world, that matchup against Alabama. And then Virginia is the team that is a team that many people expect to be Duke's biggest competition in the ACC. Maybe it's between Virginia and Louisville with the way Louisville's transfer class came together. If Virginia is that caliber of team, they should beat Kentucky at home, and they should beat Kentucky at home, I would say, somewhat easily, because even with Milan Momcilovic, Kentucky's roster is a bit of an island of misfit toys. It's a lot more misses in the transfer portal than it is hits. So I think if Virginia is as good as we think they are, and for the ACC's sake, we hope that Virginia is as good as we think they are, that's a big game. That's going to be a big game for how the ACC is viewed come Selection Sunday, how that second tier of ACC teams is viewed, how a lot of Duke's hopefully victories in the ACC are going to be viewed if Virginia is able to take care of business against Kentucky.
And it's those middle teams, right? It's the teams like a NC State, a Syracuse, a Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, Notre Dame. Like those type of teams need to show that they can beat a quality team from another conference because, as you mentioned, yeah, sure. Everyone says the rising tide lifts all ships, but in the case of the ACC, Duke and the rest, right? It's what has been built over the last couple of years because Duke has run away with the ACC the past couple of years. So Duke can't help bring everybody up. Everyone else has got to kind of help themselves. And these are the type of opportunities to do that. If you look at the end of this and you see the ACC has more wins than the SEC, people then will start to go, oh, the ACC is much improved. But if they don't, hopefully we don't have a ransacking like we did a couple of years ago. But if they don't win more games and the SEC wins this challenge, people easily can just throw the ACC down the river and say they're not what we thought they were. Obviously, this is just one game. There are other games in the non-conference schedule that'll help form that opinion. But this is a direct competition, and the ACC needs to look at these and say, hey, not just to the rest of the country, but to people like ESPN, like, hey, when it comes to basketball, we're the ones that butter your bread, not the SEC. So, figure out how to schedule us for some of these primetime games because when you schedule us against each other, we're the ones that are coming out on top. That's how they should be approaching this, and hopefully each of these teams can figure that out and have the ACC rule this challenge for this year. Let's close out with the women's side of the ACC-SEC, and we'll focus on some of the other games, but let's start with Duke's draw. Duke women draw South Carolina at home. Thursday, December 3rd in Cameron. Last year, they hosted LSU in Cameron, which was a game where they started out on a tear, and then LSU came back and thumped them. But that was kind of the spark that the catalyst for the Duke women running off like a 15, 16 game winning streak and really getting back to the ball that they were playing to get them very far in the tournament. They get to the Elite Eight and were within a few minutes of getting to a Final Four once again. But Scott, these are the type of games they want to win. The South Carolinas are the ones like they play them in the Elite Eight a couple years ago. They were holding their own and they just fell short, right? And so they didn't play them in Vegas. They get thumped, but at least they take that and learn that lesson. This is a game that if they want to be known as one of the elite teams, and Kara Lawson wants everyone to think of Duke on the women's side as an elite program alongside the South Carolinas and the UCLAs and the UConns and the Texas, right? To do that, you have to beat these teams. And so I like that they draw a really high opponent. They draw South Carolina, one of the best programs on the women's side. Dawn Staley, I think the world of her. This is the only time that I will ever root against her. But this is a team that is going to be reloaded, ready to be 1 or 2 or 1A, whatever you want to call them, in the country. And Duke has to figure out a way to take them down.
Anyone who follows the women's game knows that it's UConn and South Carolina, and then it's everyone else. And UCLA maybe is with their national championship last year is starting the challenge for that, but that's the state of the women's game. Duke has a real chance to start knocking on that door to cement themselves as part of that tier this year. Duke has an opportunity with the combination of returning players that they have maintained with healthy players that they're getting back. The fact that Emily Skinner is going to be on the court this year with high quality impact transfers they have. Texas's whole Final Four team seems to have left for whatever reason. Duke was the benefit of that a little bit. Duke, this is the year that Kara Lawson needs to break into the Final Four. This is the year that, barring injury, and injuries are, the biggest wild card in the women's game, because they for whatever reason happen a little bit more often. This is the team that Kara Lawson can break through with. And if that's going to happen, it starts by beating that team, beating the best to be the best, and doing it at home. And man, I hope that Cameron is filled to the brim for that game. Man, I hope that there is a real section of Cameron crazies for that game, because the Duke women deserve it, and this team deserves it, and this team is going to need every ounce of Cameron Indoor Stadium magic to beat, one of the greatest coaches, men's or women's sides, in Dawn Staley, and what that South Carolina team is going to look like. I'm psyched for this game. This is another game this should be a top 5 matchup. this could be, number 2 versus number 3, number 2 versus number 4, come December. I really hope that this is the game that Duke puts itself on the map is, hey, we're coming for the top tier of the sport. And I hope that it's also the game where we see Cameron Magic, Cameron Indoor Stadium, Cameron Crazies transitioning over to the women's game and giving that women's team everything they give the men's team every night.
I agree. I watch every women's game. I really love how they play. I love their fight and the fact that they had so many games that they were down or they'd have a terrible quarter and they would come back and fight for the win, especially when they were prolonging that win streak that they did have. And even, Ashton Jackson, who can forget her shot in the NCAA tournament? It was just incredible, right? And for people who are lamenting, and by people, I mean the season ticket holders on the men's side, who are lamenting the fact that you don't get a lot of good matchups in Cameron, step on over to the other side here. There's a huge matchup here in Cameron when you may be lamenting the fact that Florida is not coming in the ACC Challenge back to Cameron this year because we had them last year. But the very next day, or 2 days later, I should say, you get to have a top 2 opponent walk into your building, and you don't want them to leave with a win. So I'm really hoping that as you mentioned, is a game that they can even, they have the in lines where they kind of put like a bar and like a beer garden type of thing for certain games.
No. That needs to be filled.
Yeah, clear that out. Pull the bleachers out like we do for the men. Fill that thing up 93-14. I want that to happen for this game and for every game, honestly, because like you said, the women deserve it. They are really, really good. And I'm hoping that this is the year that they don't just knock at the door. They kick the thing open and get to the Final Four. So with that, that'll end it for this episode of Duke Basketball Roundup. Just a reminder, folks, we are going to be doing some NBA draft previews. Scott and I are going to record some of those, and then we'll release them in time over the next few days, probably early next week. Jason will also at some point return from his vacation, and we'll be able to chime in on those. And you may see those throughout the week as we lead up to the NBA draft, which takes place on the 23rd, I want to say, 23rd and 24th. It's the first round, second round are on different nights. So we will have 2 nights where we have guys that could go in that particular portion of the draft. So continue to follow us, continue to send us questions and emails, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. Scott, thank you so much again for being here. We'll see you.
Always.
We're going to record tomorrow, I think, probably. So I'll see you very, very soon. But for all of you, continue to follow us, subscribe, review, send it to your friends. We are not done. This is not the off season. This is just the season where we don't get as much news as possible. And so we try to make it work. But for now, he's Scott. I'm Donald. This is the Duke Band. They are playing us out, taking us home.